as John said, my name's Kimberly Gibson, and I am one of those new additions to the America Makes team that you mentioned, and my role is that of Ecosystem Director. And a goal of this America Makes members meeting and exchange, this MMX, is, of course, to unite this community and encourage the collaboration, and then build a comprehensive, globally competitive AM ecosystem. And we keep using this word ecosystem. And we call it the additive ecosystem because ecosystems are interconnected, interdependent systems. And in speaking about the additive ecosystem, we mean every aspect of additive manufacturing, from design to finished product, raw materials, education and training across the supply chain. And as John said this morning, this is really about creating an enduring infrastructure for this technology to advance it and adopt it and accelerate it. So today we have an amazing group of panelists who are going to explore what is needed from a public-private partnership to advance competitiveness and to increase the adoption of additive manufacturing in the USA. And I'm going to ask each of them, they're all coming online, give them a moment to do that. Hello, Danielle. Hello, Ellen. I see Ben Johnson there as well. There's Rick. Hi, Rick. And finally, Adam Hicks. All right, the gang's all here. So I'm going to ask each of you to briefly introduce yourself and your role related to additive in your respective organization. And I'm going to start with, I'm going to call on you so we can keep this rolling. I'm going to ask Danielle Coate to go first. Danielle, introduce yourself.
Sure, thanks, Kimberly. So Danielle Coate, an assistant professor in material science and engineering at Worcester Polytechnic Institute. So there I lead a large research group where we do particularly cold spray and wire arc additive manufacturing efforts. Also lots of feedstock powder characterization research. Also teach metal additive manufacturing course.
Thank you, Danielle. Next, I'd like to move to Miss Ellen Lee with Ford.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ellen Lee. I'm the technical leader for additive manufacturing at in our research organization at Ford Motor Company. I've been working in additive for about 8 years now. I put together the first dedicated research program in additive manufacturing, although we've been using it for quite some time, really focused on prototyping. My role in research is to look at the far-term use cases for additive manufacturing across the company. And so what I look for is how do we address all of the gaps that prevent us from using additive for all of the applications where we could see value, and especially towards series production for additive on our vehicles.
Thank you, Ellen. Next up, we have Ben Johnson with 3D Systems.
Hey, thanks, Kim. My name is Ben Johnson. I work for a company called 3D Systems as our Vice President of Portfolio and Regulatory in the healthcare segment of our group. In healthcare, we're focused on taking hardware, software, materials, and our services organization and developing solutions in medical devices, dental, and regenerative medicine as well.
Thank you, Ben. Next up, we have Rick Russell with NASA.
Hello, I'm Rick Russell with NASA. I work for a group called the NASA Engineering and Safety Center, which is an independent technical organization under the Office of Chief Engineer. My role is I'm the Materials Technical Fellow, which puts me in a spot where I'm responsible for not only managing the health of the materials discipline with NASA, but we also support all the programs with their special needs. And in the additive world, my focus is on the certification and qualification side of it. I led a group who authored the NASA Standard 6030, which was released in April, and has already proven to be a pretty valuable document. We're very proud of it. and then folks are we got a lot of positive response from it. So glad to be here.
Thank you, Rick. Glad to have you. The final panelist is Adam Hicks. Adam.
Hi, my name's Adam Hicks. I sit at AFRL, the Air Force Research Laboratory, in the Materials and Manufacturing Directorate, specifically Manufacturing Technologies Division. My role is I'm the America Makes Program Manager, the government program lead. And in that role, I act as a kind of representative for all of OSD to provide oversight and guidance for additive manufacturing and provide a bent that is OSD driven. I've worked in additive for many years now, just now stepping into the program management role. So very excited to be working with the Institute in this role. Happy to be here.
Thank you, Adam. Before we jump into our questions, and the first one's coming your way, Adam, I want to encourage everyone to be thinking about your questions and type them in the Q&A, and also to remind all of our guests here today that you can vote on your favorite question, because I'm sure we're going to have tons for this amazing panel. So get those questions rolling so we can get the votes and get them answered. So, okay, Adam, first question comes to you. I want you to kick it off because I want you to talk about what is a technology ecosystem from your point of view, and how do you think that relates to this public-private partnership?
Sure. So give you a little bit more of my history. I actually started with America Make several years ago. John kind of alluded to it earlier. I was at the University of Dayton Research Institute working on the mammals program. So I think that gives me a pretty good kind of from the weeds view of what an additive ecosystem can be. And I've kind of jumped through the ranks. You know, I think through my time, both in industry and academia and in the government, I've seen a lot of researchers doing like great work in additive. I've seen a lot of great minds trying to think through additive. And that includes large and small businesses, universities, nonprofits. And they're all really trying to stake their claim in additive. Everybody's trying to find their niche. And something you might not know about me, I love analogies and metaphor. That's basically how I view the world. So I kind of view it like we're all these voices, right? And we're all screaming really loud, trying to be heard, trying to sound different, trying to be noticed. And if we all just do that independent of one another, it just is a cacophony, right? And so I think what I would equate to an ecosystem is like a choir, right? Where we're not just shouting independently of one another, but in tandem with one another. And if we can play off of strengths and weaknesses, then what we have is, you know, music instead of just noise. And that way everyone gets to be heard and everyone gets to hear everyone else at the same time. You know, in order for that to happen, you know, I think that it requires a director. And I think that's where America Makes comes in. So I think, you know, as far as the technology ecosystem goes, I think it's possible to have one organically form. I think it's easier if you can shepherd one into existence with a public-private partnership where we're all providing some assistance for that shepherding, for the directing. And, you know, it's in America Makes his mission to convene, to coordinate, and to catalyze. And that to me sounds like a director. And so that's kind of my view of an ecosystem, a technology ecosystem.
Thank you, Adam. And I think we've got some great stuff from John earlier today, where he explained sort of where we're headed in the big picture and with some detail. So I wanted to give you the chance to say what, you know, to say something, because I think it's a good kickoff for what we're about to talk about. And I'm also gonna start with Ben and say, Ben, I want you to answer this question in the panel. So what does managing an AM ecosystem mean to your work in the medical field?
In healthcare, we generally rely on three pillars in our segment. The first, of course, is clinical care. So what we do clinically to help improve patient outcomes and help decrease the costs of clinical care. That pillar is really supported by two other parts. One is research and the things that we need to do in order to research new hardware, new materials, new procedures that help advance that mission for clinical care. And then the third is the third major tenet is in training and education. So how do we, not only do we train clinicians to use those tools, how do we train the researchers to use and develop new technologies? And then how do we train and educate the workforce that's going to be deploying and manufacturing several of those types of medical devices for clinical care? So that's what I think of in terms of the ecosystem in healthcare. And all of three of those pillars are really interrelated, of course. And at 3D Systems, we devote time and effort and energy to all three of those pillars with the goal, of course, of translating what's done in research in combination with education into clinical care.
I'm going to do a quick follow-up with you, Ben, and ask you, I know that the medical community has a significant need to adapt additive. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about how that community is coalescing around a set of problem statements and solutions at the moment. Mostly the COVID thing.
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, a great example, of course, is during the start of the pandemic, there was significant needs in supply chain for providing critically needed PPE, protections to frontline healthcare workers, also diagnostic tools as well that could not be sourced through the normal channels. And so almost immediately a partnership was developed between the public and private sector. A great example of that, of course, is the partnership that was a memorandum of understanding that was signed between the NIH, FDA, and the Veterans Affairs Administration to receive and test and essentially blast several of the different types of grassroots initiatives across the maker community and then the additive manufacturing community for parts that can be useful to the frontline healthcare worker staff. And then a little bit down the road, America Makes got involved as well in order to translate what that work that was being done across that consortium out to the maker community so they could become immediately impactful and helpful during a time of crisis. And I think that set up a really good ecosystem for times of crisis and how you can take advantage essentially of the manufacturing capability within the United States in order to address issues in the healthcare community. So that's a great shining example of that public-private partnership that can evolve.
Thank you, Ben. Ellen, we've all been hearing lots of news reports about different changes in the automotive sector and supply chain from, autonomous and connected vehicles where the vehicle becomes less mechanical, more electrical, to all of the different adaptations that are happening. So it's a really exciting time to be in the automotive sector. What I want to understand from you today is from your perspective in that sector, if you're going to adapt additive, how are you thinking about moving forward on that? How does that look for you?
That's a great question and a very difficult one because I think there's, depending on who you ask, there's so many different answers to it. And because of the flexibility and the benefits and the strengths of additive manufacturing, I think one can imagine so many different use cases within the automotive industry where additive manufacturing can bring value. So I think one of the things that we struggle with the most is kind of narrowing down what it is that we want to attack first. So from my point of view, I'm tackling one of the toughest challenges which is scaled production or series production that is relatively high volume if we can make it there. Right? And so when we consider this, we really need to consider what the ecosystem in the automotive manufacturing industry is, because here additive is a real underdog in participating. And so it is a tool that needs to be applied very carefully, but needs to fit into the already existing ecosystem that we have for automotive manufacturing. But as you mentioned, all of the things that are happening within the automotive industry today give us a lot of opportunities to apply additive manufacturing. And in particular, for things like electrification, we're looking at designing so many new systems. A lot of times, we're hearing that customers have range. I'm sorry, I can't think of the word right now.
Range anxiety.
Range anxiety, right? So, how do we design those battery systems to give us the power density that we need, as well as the range, and how do we make the vehicles more lightweight? Well, it's a perfect time for additive, because many of these, as we're ramping up, we have relatively low volumes. And so not only can we use additive to help us in this critical stage for understanding how to best design something based on what its function is, we are still at the stage where we have relatively low volumes, where we can really take advantage of the design freedoms that we get from additive to get to production, robust, very high quality parts. And so I think during this time, those are the opportunities that we're most focused on. How do we really leverage those strengths, things that we can't do with conventional manufacturing today, that we can depend on additive for? Because if you think about the comparison between additive manufacturing and conventional manufacturing, we've been doing injection molding, casting, stamping for decades or centuries, even in some cases. And so we know very well how to make those as efficient as possible. So, it's a really a big change in mindset, how we identify the biggest opportunities to create value.
Thank you, Ellen. It's raising so many other questions for you, but we're going to get back to those. I want to hear now from Rick. So Rick, NASA needs help to do things that often nobody's ever done before, right? I mean, you've been at this a while, and what I mean by that is you've been creating new things and wrapping your head around how to qualify things. I really would love to hear on what you think the role of this public-private partnership has been in that work, and how you see it advancing in the future.
Okay, first I want to start off, when I got asked to do a panel on ecosystem, I had to Google it, because I really wasn't sure what ecosystem was, right? And one of the definitions I saw was it's a complex network or an interconnected system. So additive is really both, right? It's both complex and it's interconnected. And so in our world, let's just step back to our own selfish way of looking at additive. The parts that we and the technologies that we were originally targeting to develop an additive were we went for the hard problem first, right? And we went for very complex systems, new alloy systems, and things that are going to be stressed in a lot of ways. So that's the complex. The interconnected is, in at least in, to start from the NASA world, is that we have to deal with other disciplines besides ourselves. It's not just a material scientist. We have to be able to inspect the part. We have to be able to qualify the part per the definitions. We have to make sure that it's damage tolerance or satisfies our fracture critical folks. So that's, so we did that, and we thought hard about it, and the work started at Marshall Space Flight Center, where we were dealing with engine components, and they developed some of their own internal philosophies, which were put into standards, and that's what we used for this new standard that we released in April. And so as far as moving on to the public-private part about it, I'm really I'm a big fan of people, reading what we wrote, and we wrote a document that was meant to be, and everybody's favorite word is tailorable, right? You can take this document and you can print a complex part that's going to be part of an engine that's going to land on the moon, or you can build a bracket for your car, and you're really using the same principles. It's just that they're adapted in a different way. So you have to. So that's why we focus a lot on classification. We focus a lot on how you use part classification to define, not to define risk, but to define consequence of failure, which later can be used by the user to look at risk, right? And so that we that goes down into ultimately what kind of process control you need. So I really believe that we can use since we started with the high bar, we can use that as sort of a to shape our thinking as we go down to things that are maybe less complicated or in high volume, because we're not a high volume organization. We print 3 parts, or 2 parts. I mean, Ellen's laughing at me, right?
Yes, she is. She prints
10,000 parts. We print 3. So I mean, so our philosophy is going to be different, but it's not. I mean, it helps you. We want to have a statistical basis for our materials, even though we're only going to fly 3 of them. So I really think that if we all want to share and get together and talk about things, that we can use things that are, we all have something to bring to the table. I think that's what Adam was saying when he talked originally, right? We all have different perspectives. This is a very diverse panel. We all have different things to say, and I think if we work together as we move forward, and I really think that the roadmaps that America Makes is putting together is a great opportunity for folks to look at the different areas. There's like 6 roadmaps, I think, that we're putting together, and then you can use those roadmaps to look at materials, look at genome, and all the other things that were value chain, and I'm missing some of them, but we can use those to help work together as a community to make additive better.
Yes, I loved that. The rocket scientist view of the world. That was fantastic. I want to let Danielle jump in here on the academia side, because you do deal with so many things. You touch so many different areas in academia, and especially at your particular role. I wonder if you could talk about, what do you think the role of academia is to work with the Institutes for Success, and talk about that.
Definitely. So I just love Adam's analogy of the choir. I think that's perfect. So I think continuing with that analogy, we're giving the voice lessons, we're training those next choir singers, right? And it's interesting because additive is so interdisciplinary, right? You don't just need to know manufacturing, you need to know material science, you need to know robotics and basic programming. So, with the choir analogy, we're training people how to sight read, we're training them how to use their voice properly, how to breathe properly, right? Like all those different components, we're trying to incorporate that into our curriculum for the students. So when they're ready to go off to the choir, they can follow the instruction of the director, they can work with other people, they can, make that music. So I think that's a really big role. That's the more traditional role. The other role, of course, is also singing in the choir with the research side, right? Because we can also play in that space. So we have a different role, but we can also do the research. And as a lot of faculty in academia, that's what we like. Like don't tell my students that, but I enjoy the research part, maybe even more than the teaching part. So I think our role is kind of twofold there.
That's great, Danielle. Thank you. Rick, you and both Ellen, you guys talked about the idea of standards and the importance of those standards. I wondered if the two of you and Ben, everybody could really riff on the idea that, we've done a lot of work so far in our road mapping that really relies on aerospace. It's good for aerospace. how does some of that work transition into other sectors such as medical or automotive? I mean, I think all of you jump in on that.
Well, I'll start. You know, the basic pillars of our of standardization are really you know, there's four things, right? You have to, number one, you have to have a qualified process, right? You need to know, you know, you have to have a qualified process to start. Number two is you have to understand the properties that you're producing of the materials you're producing, right? You have to understand that. And number three is you actually have to bathe those properties with statistical analysis. It's not just, you know, it's not pulling three coupons and thinking you understand your properties. You need to understand for the application you have what the statistical process is, and you put that all together, and you have a qualified plan. You have to have a plan that you're going to stick to. So when you qualify any part, whether it's a rocket engine part or you know, a medical part for Ben, or you know, or whatever we're doing in automotive or whatever, I think if you follow those four things, you're gonna end up with a success.
I'll jump in. So I think I agree with everything that Rick said. In terms of being able to qualify, though, I think the importance of standards is that you need to standardize the way you do things, what you're measuring, and the way that you analyze, so that you can compare things, you know, equally, on equal footing, apples to apples. And you know, when we start to think about leveraging the work from other companies or other sectors, different materials, et cetera, I think it becomes even more important to do so, because there can be so many variations in how things are made and how you compare things. And so when you start to compare, especially if you think about from one modality to another, you know, that you might be working with similar materials, but not exactly, you know, you start to step into the danger zone there. You need to be able to understand what it is you're comparing and how they're different. And one way to do so is with standards. If you standardize the way that you do things, then it allows us to leverage these partnerships, the public-private partnerships, even more so, because then we're able to collaborate with one another pre-competitively and share those data to use information that, you know, one industry has developed towards advancing technology in another sector.
Yeah, and just to cap off on what Ellen and Rick had said, part of the success in healthcare that we've had with additive is because we're able to conform to standards that already exist and have existed for years in the healthcare sector. And it turns out that some of the additive manufacturing technologies and materials that we use happen to conform to those standards. And so there wasn't a lot of effort needed in order to create new standards and do new testing. We had that already established. Where the difficulty came in is that additive allowed us to fabricate parts in different ways that weren't really thought of when those standards were originally written. And so there's different ways that you can orient or place parts into a build platform to get different results out of it. And the understanding about how those different parameters affect the output of the part that you're manufacturing wasn't well understood at the time, and that's where we put a lot of effort, at least in our organization, into. And so in some cases those standards already exist, and that's great, but they need to be updated a bit for additive manufacturing.
And that's a great segue, Ben. We've got a question on the sidebar that's got 3 votes already, and I think it's a good segue to that. So I'll read the question. For risk mitigation, which is what all of you are really talking about, for risk mitigation for OEM additive adoption, what area needs the most development? They've made some choices here: hardware, software, materials characterization, traceability techniques, non-destructive or destructive evaluation, etc. So you can choose any of those or something else, but for risk mitigation for OEM AM adoption, what area needs the most development as far as you all think?
Can I start that off, please? So I'm not an OEM, right? But I've talked to a few. I feel like one of the major hurdles right now is, and Rick has really put a fine point on this, which is understanding, right? One of the biggest risks is understanding statistically your process and being able to get repeatable results. So I guess I would cap that as data. You could also cap that as materials characterization, making sure that I understand how I got my data, making sure that it is collected in a way that has good pedigree, that I could then has traceability. I think that one of the major risks, which Ben also alluded to this, which is not true for aerospace, that saying that we have materials and we can pull from standards. I don't think that we've done that a lot. I think that we have decided fundamentally that even if we have a TIE 6.4 standard, the material I'm making is fundamentally different until I can prove otherwise. And so really gathering that body of data and having that body of data as risk mitigation that says the material will work for what I want it to, I think is the biggest thing right now.
I'll jump in as well. When I saw this question in the Q&A, I thought, yes, all of them. Because at the root of it, Adam is correct that it's understanding of the process, structure, property, and performance relationships. And that ties in hardware, software, materials characterization, and then even traceability so that you can, track what you have made before. And then the evaluation technologies. So it is all of them, but at the root, it is to understand what levers that you pull have an effect in what way on having high quality results, whatever it is that your requirement is, and to be able to do that over and over and over again, not only for the printing process itself, but for any post-processing, any aspects of design that you can do to mitigate any risks that might happen, certain design characteristics that may make something easier to get repeatable results for, and then especially with materials, right? So we need to look at batch to batch repeatability as well. So it really is in all of those things, but at the root of it is understanding the process, structure, property, performance relationships.
All right.
Yeah, and then
Go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, just quickly from the OEM perspective, choosing between any one of those is impossible, and they're all interconnected and related. It's kind of like choosing maybe your favorite child. So very difficult to do. I would say that the market certainly is trending and has indicated that a lot more development is going into traceability and the software that's being created to help maintain a reliable manufacturing cell around the parts that are being manufactured. So there's a lot of mergers and acquisitions happening in that kind of traceability type of capability that's needed in order to translate additive from more than just prototyping, but into manufacturing at a large scale. And so I would give that up as an indication, at least from what the market and where the market is going. Go ahead, Rick. Sorry.
Well, I mean, when I looked at the list, the one that jumped out to me was non-destructive inspection, right? Because the biggest thing that we are going to have the hardest time doing is inspecting parts that have complex internal features, and there's just no way of doing it without cutting it up or whatever. So what we need from the OEMs is we need stellar in situ monitoring, right? We're in situ, where the monitoring of a part while you're while you're building it can be translated into part quality, and then the fantasy land end story is not even having to do NDE at the end of the day, because I know Adam just shook his head, that'll never happen, but but or get a very better idea of where you're. So that's sort of where we're putting our focus from the NASA point of view now. Is we want to dial up the gain a little bit on understanding what's out there in this world of in situ inspection, because especially for, again, selfishly, we have a lot of these rocket engine components that have 30 mil internal walls that you can inspect, but we're supposed to understand. And then of course the other thing that the OEMs can stop doing is adding more lasers to their system, because that just makes our life more complicated every time they make the machine more complicated, and they're all hating me right now. But anyway, so that's where we're heading. And matter of fact, we're running a workshop in January on that. Looked on LinkedIn, you might see something on it. But yeah, that's my opinion.
Well, I'm sure that we could continue on this vein for a long time. There's so much bouncing around. Do you have a point you'd like to make, Adam, on this before we move?
No. I was just going to say that I agree with Rick on the in situ monitoring portion of it. Not about not inspecting it after it's printed. I don't think you'll ever get an Air Force person to say, I don't want to look at it in its final form. You looked at it while you were making it. That's probably good enough. What I was going to say is, one of the problems that I've had up to this point, especially with things like metal additive, is variability. And by that, I mean the need to treat every serial number machine as its own forge, basically. And then having to identify the qualification process to the serial number. And I think that is really inhibited adoption of AM. Imagine if every oven in the world, when you turned it to 350 degrees, went to a slightly different temperature, how frustrated bakers would be. And that's kind of where we're at right now, right? And so we really have to limit the variability, because whether I am above where I need or below where I need, if I have a tight variability statistically, I can work with that. I can design with that, and suddenly it becomes a viable option. But when the variability gets too big, it's not viable for so many of the things that we want. And so, I would put at the top of my list, machine to machine in the same serial, in the same class variability.
And by the way, I say Fantasyland before I said.
I know you said Fantasyland, and that's squarely where that was located. I agree with the Fantasyland vision of it. That would be great. It'd be fantastic. But I also agree that we can't take a part off of the plane and CT it every time it lands in order to know it's good. We have to have a way of figuring out if it's good or not.
Well, what you guys are really pulling out are, the complexity that we keep uncovering, whether that's with the R&D process, the actual machine itself, the wonderful OEMs of 3D printing machines and materials keep making changes so that we can never kind of get our hands around the one version and design for that. And while that innovation's amazing, it makes it harder to create those standards that I'll say in medical and automotive in particular we need to lock it down and move. I heard you all say that in the pre-conversation. So I do want to shift a minute, because part of our goal here is to talk about the ecosystem. And I could really enjoy these technical aspects for a long time, but if we know that more than 90% of manufacturing businesses are small businesses, we've seen those factoids from the Deloitte study. If those are mostly small businesses in the manufacturing community, how do we help them adopt AM? Now, specifically, I'm going to zero in on a point. One of the questions in the column is that this is focused on auto, but it could also be for medical. When you're looking at auto OEM serial production, what are some of the pros and cons to having existing tier suppliers do the manufacturing versus bringing it in-house? And then I want you to think about that, because the small businesses are the supply chain, right? And the follow-up question to that is how are those suppliers as open to AM adoption as the OEM? So it's kind of a supply chain OEM question on adoption. Who wants to take that on? That sounds like an Ellen question. Yeah.
I was going to say, I can go first. So today, I think there has been a lot of progress in this area. Several years ago, I think you had kind of two camps of suppliers, I would say, for automotive additive parts. It would be looking at trying to teach your existing automotive supply base how to do additive manufacturing, or to teach the service bureaus who are very skilled at additive manufacturing, but mostly for prototyping, how do you do production manufacturing, and specifically for the automotive industry. And each one had a lot to learn in each of those areas to be able to get to be the kind of the perfect supplier for supplying robust, good quality automotive parts made with additive manufacturing. So there has been a lot of movement now that there exist some companies that can play both those roles. But I think that there is a huge thing that our existing supply base has, is that they know how we work, they know how we, what types of requirements we have, how to fit into our ecosystem. They know the types of materials, the tests, etc. And so there's a distinct advantage for those that are already existing, but they need to be very willing to invest in learning about additive manufacturing, because that, as we all know, is very complex, and you can't just buy a 3D printer and you're on your way, right? So I think that in some cases we've had some suppliers who showed a very early interest, and put together a dedicated team again to really understand the process structure relationships and all of those things to be able to make good parts. And so working hand in hand with them to bring parts was or is one pathway to production parts. The other one we've also had success with, but have had to do a lot of teaching, is to really say, this is the way that we're set up. This is the way that we do things. This is what we require of you. And a lot of it is not that well understood, especially to those companies who are used to doing prototyping, right? They say, we have this printer and we have this material, we're ready to go. And all of those things that we already talked about in terms of qualifying and repeatability, and looking at variability within a build volume, for example, from part to part inside, and from print to print, all of those things are very, very important, and we do those for our conventional processes, but it's another dimension because there are so many other more complex things that we need to consider for additive as well. And so when we're working with a lot of these service bureaus at the beginning, they would say, oh, we're ready to go. This is a material and process that works. And as we get into it, we find out that there's a lot that they don't know yet. And so I think there's pros and cons to looking at each, but we're starting to have these companies that come up that already have a very good base in understanding what's needed for scaled manufacturing or product or quality manufacturing, as well as in additive manufacturing.
Well, it sounds like growing unicorns in the automotive space is a good idea right now. That's cool. Thank you for that, Ellen. And Ben, what about the medical side? Do you see some parallels here? How's that different?
Yeah, in the healthcare sector, we started out by essentially having to prime the market. And so in healthcare, especially in orthopedics, the market is dominated by 5 companies, essentially, who are very risk adverse to adopting new technologies. And so we took the strategy that we will tackle these questions and these problems to create high quality, reliable parts that have regulatory stance behind them, and and work with those big companies to distribute those products that we were manufacturing. And then along the way, just as Ellen alluded to, we thought we knew what we were doing, and we thought we had everything in place. And then working with groups that had a lot of expertise, like those 5 dominant players, really helped to accelerate all the processes and controls that we needed to have in place. And that has really propelled, again, what we do in the healthcare sector. And then more recently, we find that our customers want to onboard the technology into their own manufacturing capabilities in order to reduce costs for themselves. And we're in a lucky position where we can also support that as well. So we can take the body of knowledge that we learned a decade or 2 ago and help translate that to our customers who want to develop their own manufacturing capabilities. And so we have a pretty flexible business model around that that also helps to penetrate additive technologies into the healthcare sector.
Thank you for that, Ben. I really want to ask another question on the supplier situation. There is a question that just came in, I think can help us drill down a little bit more. What factors or opportunities exist to accelerate the learning curve in marrying supplier capability and designer requirements? So how can we drill down on that? Again, it's about the supply chain and how can we get it ready. I mean, we do feel this is something at America Makes that we want to continue to do. And honestly, there's lots of ways to approach it, and we're looking for feedback. Adam?
Yeah. I mean, I think we kind of alluded to one of the solutions earlier, which is standards, right? It's way easier for a business to convince somebody that they have a good product if they have the standards and the data to show that their product is good. You know, right now with a lot of big OEMs, even the DoD, we're basically point qualifying producers of additive manufacturing, saying, you know, you have to go through a lot of rigmarole to show that what you can produce is good, and then I'll qualify you to produce that one thing on that one machine, and then that's good, right? And that's a big hurdle for like you talked about, small businesses, 90% or whatever the figure was of the businesses, right? And that's not necessarily true for other traditional manufacturing, where I can say I bought a material lot that has these properties, I machined it, I followed my AS 9100 processes, and then the part I gave you is good. And how do I know that? Because look, my 9100 processes, right? My aerospace grade processes. And so we really need something like that for additive. We also need to identify what the standardization's gaps are. I believe there's a meeting next week for the Additive Manufacturing Standardization Collaborative, where we're looking to identify, you know, what those gaps are to help inform standardizations communities like, ASTM with the F42 committee on additive manufacturing. I think just giving businesses a bar in which they can meet, and then having some known quality of good as a single rung on the ladder for them would be tremendously helpful.
So I'm going to give a little plug. So as one of the automotive OEMs in US Car, which is the United States consortium for automotive research, we talked about just this specific thing. How do we ready our supply base for additive manufacturing? And how do we convey to the additive manufacturing community what is needed specifically from the automotive sector? And so we talked a lot of about standardization, even about specifications for certain materials and so forth. And during these discussions, it dawned on us that we need to take a step back and say, here are the things, before we get to talking about the details of specifications, here are the things that we need that don't exist today for automotive additive manufacturing. And so we put together what we're calling the Automotive Additive Manufacturing Roadmap. So it kind of highlights some specific areas that the automotive industry needs to be able to implement additive manufacturing. And so that's maybe a start for some of these small businesses to take a look at what's in there, what types of things we would require for end use production parts for the automotive industry. And then taking it a step further through the US car platform as well, we're starting to put together a statement of requirements that very clearly says to our suppliers, if you are to supply us with additive parts, here is what we expect from you. And so we are trying to be very clear and explicit about some of these things that we kind of take for granted that we already know, but new businesses, businesses that haven't already dealt with the automotive industry may not know this. And so if you're interested, that first roadmap is available if you just go to uscar.org. It's available there for anyone to download and take a look at. And then, in soon, I'm not sure what the time frame will be, but we will have the standard of statement of requirements for our suppliers. The other thing that I would say is adding on to what Adam said about the AMSC and understanding the gaps, is that there is in the F42 committee, the applications team, and one that's focused on automotive and transportation. But there's not as much involvement from the automotive side as we would like, especially compared to other sectors, right? So I think in order to really have our voice heard about what's needed specifically for automotive, we need more more engagement from the automotive sector participants, not only through ASTM, but in America Makes and other consortia as well. So I guess that's on me to tell all my colleagues to join.
No, that's a really great thing you just said there. And Adam, I think we've got time for one more question, and I want you to kind of take us out here. The last question for you is on managing the mission. So who should be paying for all of this great stuff?
Yeah, I mean, we kind of alluded to, the work that we have. A lot of it has been aerospace and space, kind of has a bent to it, right? And that's because, the OSD kind of took a look and said, low volume parts. There's a lot of value for additive manufacturing in these areas, in the area of aerospace and space. Some of that, I think a lot of that has to do with volume, right? We are not producing what Ford is producing, just clearly. And so we are taking advantage of those things that additive can take advantage of for our benefits. And that's, where the private public part comes in, right? We're providing some funding and some guidance to help solve those aerospace and space issues, because that's where we see the value really coming out. When it comes to healthcare and automotive, I think that's a good question. US car was mentioned, right? So that might be some place that we can at America Makes can leverage in the future. I think a lot of that has to come from either other public consortia or from the private sector in order to really prop up the industry. I sit in the Air Force, so I very much care about Air Force and problems that have to do with the Department of Defense, and that's what my funding goes to. And so we need people in those other sectors who care about those other needs to provide the funding to solve those that aren't necessarily answered, by what we at the DoD can provide.
Yeah. There's so much more I want to get you all engaged in, but I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. We have some great questions on the side. but we have to stop. We'll let John take us out. I just want to say thank you to everyone for your time and your intention. We're going to get a chance to, this thing will be cataloged on the website. So I'm going to go back and listen again and hear with new ears what you all put together. So thank you again. Thank you.